new adventure. Was your adventure pleasant today? Come, sit with us by the fire and warm yourself on this cold night. As the flames chase away the chill, would you like to hear the tale of my journey? Very well. Make yourself comfortable, let the warmth embrace you, and listen closely to the story I am about to tell. The Black Banner War. The wind howled across the plains of Ardent Vale, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and blood. Villagers had been whispering for weeks about the return of the Black Banner, a warlord's emblem that had not been seen in 2 generations. The last time it flew, the land was swallowed by fire and despair. Now, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, a rider appeared on the ridge, cloaked in black, carrying that very banner. Fear spread faster than the coming night. Sir Alaric of Greystone stood atop the battlements of the keep, his eyes locked on the distant figure. He was a knight of the High Crown, sworn to protect the Vale and its people. But even he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The Black Banner was not just a symbol. It was a declaration of war. The rider planted the banner into the soil, a silent challenge to all who opposed his master. Alaric clenched his jaw. The last war had cost him his father. He would not let history repeat itself. That night, a council was held in the Great Hall. The fire crackled, casting long shadows over the faces of those gathered. Lords, captains, and even a few villagers attended. The news was grim. Raiding parties had already struck the northern farmlands, leaving nothing but ash. Some urged surrender, believing resistance would only bring slaughter. Others, like Alaric, called for immediate retaliation. If we bow now, Alaric growled, then the Vale will kneel forever. His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. By dawn, the decision was made. Scouts were sent out, and messengers dispatched to neighboring keeps. The Vale would stand and fight. As the first light of morning broke, Alaric watched as the villagers prepared, sharpening pitchforks, forging crude weapons, and barricading roads. The war drums had begun to beat, faint at first, but growing louder in his mind with every passing hour. Somewhere beyond the hills, the Black Banner's army was on the march, and so began the first day of the Black Banner War. Not with clashing swords, but with the quiet dread of knowing that death was coming. The next night was restless for everyone within the keep. Mothers kept their children close, while blacksmiths worked through the dark hours to finish what weapons they could. The ringing of hammer against iron echoed across the courtyard like a grim heartbeat. Alaric walked among the men, offering quiet words of encouragement. Many were farmers and shepherds who had never held a sword before, but desperation had a way of turning even the meek into warriors. When dawn came, a rider galloped through the gates, his horse foaming and wild-eyed. He fell to his knees before Alaric and gasped out his report. A village to the north had been razed, its people either slain or taken. The attackers were swift and disciplined, their armor marked with a black wolf sigil, the personal mark of Kael Dravok, the warlord who had once brought the kingdom to its knees. The mere mention of his name chilled the hall into silence. Kael Dravok was not just a man. He was a legend of cruelty, a shadow parents once invoked to frighten unruly children. Alaric gathered his captains and spread a map across the table. "He is testing us," Alaric said, tracing the lines of the Vale with his gauntlet finger. "These attacks are meant to sow fear, to draw us out before we are ready." His captains murmured their agreement, but there was no easy solution. Every hour they delayed meant more lives lost. Every move they made could be a trap. As night fell again, Alaric stood alone on the walls, looking north. In the distance, he could see fires, not of villages, but of enemy war camps. They were closer now, much closer. His heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and resolve. "If you are coming for us," he whispered into the cold night air, "then come. I will meet you on the field." And far beyond the Vale, in a camp draped with black banners, Kael Dravok himself sat in silence, staring into the flames. His scarred hands rested on the hilt of his sword as he listened to the reports of his scouts. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Let them prepare," he said, his voice low and rough. "It will make their fall all the sweeter." The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. The morning mist clung to the ground like a shroud as Sir Alaric mounted his horse. His scouts had returned just before dawn, bringing dire news. The Black Banner host had split into 3 war bands, each poised to strike a different part of the Vale. If left unchecked, they would cut off trade routes and choke the keep into starvation before winter. It was a ruthless, calculated move, exactly what Alaric had expected from Kael Dravok. Alaric ordered a small force of riders to harry the enemy supply lines, while he led a vanguard north to intercept the nearest warband. They rode hard across the open fields, the pounding of hooves echoing like distant thunder. Farmers and villagers watching the hills as their protectors galloped past, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. By midday, the riders spotted their quarry, a column of black-armored soldiers marching through the pass. The enemy was disciplined, their black wool banners snapping in the wind. Alaric raised his hand, signaling his men to halt. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This would be the first true clash of the Black Banner War, the first blood to be spilled in open battle. Loose the signal arrow, Alaric commanded. A flaming arrow arced into the sky, bursting into a trail of smoke. From the hills, hidden archers sprang from cover and let loose a rain of arrows, cutting down the first line of enemy soldiers. The war band roared in surprise, shields coming up as they scrambled to form ranks. Alaric spurred his horse forward, leading the charge down the slope. The clash was brutal and immediate. Steel met steel, horses crashed through lines, and the air was filled with the roar of battle. Alaric's blade cut a path through the enemy, but he could already tell something was wrong. The war band was too well prepared, their formation unbroken despite the ambush. Then he saw him, a massive figure at the center of the line, clad in black plate, wielding an axe as long as a man was tall. The warrior cut down one of Alaric's knights with a single blow, scattering the riders near him. This was no ordinary soldier. This was one of Kael Dravok's chosen, an Iron Fang, the elite of the Black Banner host. Fall back, Alaric shouted, realizing the trap. The enemy hadn't been surprised at all. They had been waiting. His men disengaged with difficulty, fighting their way back up the slope as the Iron Fang advanced, his axe glinting with blood. The first clash had ended, and though Alaric's men had escaped with their lives, they had been bloodied. The war had truly begun. The survivors rode hard through the night, their torches flickering in the dark. When they finally reached the keep, they were battered, bloodied, and silent. The villagers gathered to meet them, their expressions grim as they saw the wounded carried from horseback. Alaric dismounted slowly, his armor streaked with blood, not all of it his own. Inside the war council chamber, Alaric slammed his gauntlet down on the map table, the sound echoing through the hall. "We underestimated them," he said through clenched teeth. "They knew we were coming. This was no chance encounter. We walked straight into their jaws." His captains looked uneasy. Some argued for retreating deeper into the Vale to fortify, others for calling reinforcements from the distant capital. "No," Alaric said firmly, his voice hardening. "If we keep falling back, they will burn everything behind us. We must learn their movements, their numbers, their strengths, and we must know who leads their Iron Fangs." His gaze shifted to the spy master, a hooded figure known only as Vera. "Send your crows into their camps. I want Kael Dravok's plans before he makes his next move." Meanwhile, miles away, Kael Dravok sat by a roaring fire in his war tent, the air thick with the smell of smoke and iron. Around him stood his lieutenants, scarred veterans, killers all, reporting the outcome of the skirmish. "The night lives," one of them growled. He pulled back before we could finish them. Kael's dark eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Good," he said, his voice calm but edged like a blade. "Let him live. A desperate foe fights harder and spends more lives. When he has gathered all his strength, then we will strike and crush him utterly. The Vale must learn despair before it learns obedience." He stood, towering over his men, and grasped the black banner that stood behind his throne. "Soon," he said, raising it high, "this land will kneel as it did before. And when the High Crown sends armies, we will break them too." That night, the Vale was quiet, but no one slept easily. On the battlements, Alaric stared north, haunted by the memory of the Iron Fang's axe. The black banner still flew somewhere beyond the hills, waiting. and Alaric swore to himself that before this war was done, he would tear it from the earth with his own hands. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, as Vera moved through the forest like a shadow. Wrapped in a cloak that blended with the night, she was nearly invisible, and that was precisely why Sir Alaric trusted her above all others. The Black Banner host was encamped less than a day's ride north, its campfires glowing like a constellation of hungry stars. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos, but Vera knew better. There was order in the way the tents were arranged, in the rotation of their patrols. This was an army that expected victory. She crouched at the edge of the treeline, her keen eyes taking in every detail. 2 sentries passed near her hiding place, speaking in low voices. Their words were muffled, but she caught enough. A supply caravan was arriving at dawn, and with it, a figure known only as the Speaker. Vera's heart quickened. The Speaker was Kael Dravok, strategist, a man said to know every secret road and hidden weakness in the Vale. If she could get close enough to hear their plans, they might gain the advantage they desperately needed. Moving silently, she slipped past the sentries and into the camp. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and burning pitch. Men sat around their fires sharpening swords, their faces hard and grim. At the center of the camp stood a larger tent draped in black wolf pelts. Vera crept closer, her hand on the dagger at her hip, until she was close enough to hear the low murmur of voices within. Kael Dravok's tone was unmistakable, deep, commanding, and measured. "The knight will try to fortify the Vale," he said. "Drive him to desperation. Take the southern farms. Leave nothing standing. Starve them before winter takes hold. When there's nowhere left to run, we strike to keep itself." Vera felt her chest tighten. This wasn't a campaign of conquest. It was a campaign of extermination. If Kael's orders were carried out, the Vale would be nothing but cinders before the first snow. Suddenly, a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her back into the shadows. A soldier had spotted her. She twisted, driving her dagger into his side. But the damage was done. His dying gasp alerted the camp. Shouts rang out. Torches flared. Vera ran. Arrows whistled past her as she sprinted for the treeline, her legs burning, her lungs screaming for air. She didn't stop until she reached her waiting horse and tore through the woods at a breakneck pace. By the time she reached the Vale, she was bloodied and pale but alive, and she carried a knowledge that would shape the entire course of the war. When she delivered her report to Alaric, the hall fell into a heavy silence. Kael Dravok wasn't just attacking. He meant to erase the Vale from the map, and for the first time, Alaric felt the cold weight of fear settle on him. The great hall of the keep was filled with tension. Vera stood at the center, her cloak still torn and stained with blood, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "He means to starve us," she said, her words carrying to every corner of the chamber. "His orders are burn the farms and destroy the food stores before the snows come. When winter sets in, we will be too weak to fight." Alaric's jaw tightened as he turned to his captains. "Then we cannot wait for him to strike. We move first." His words stirred the hall into murmurs. One of the older lords shook his head. "Our forces are thin. If we leave the keep, we leave the Vale open." "We have no choice," Alaric replied sharply. "If we wait behind these walls, we starve. If we strike now, we take back the farms and force him to face us on ground we choose." The debate raged until the sound of the war horn silenced them all. Villagers, knights, even blacksmiths gathered in the courtyard as Alaric stood before them. His armor was still scarred from the last battle, his voice carrying an authority that made every man and woman stand straighter. "The Black Banner seeks to erase us," Alaric said. "They will burn our homes, slaughter our kin, and salt our fields if we let them. But I say we will not wait for death to find us. We will carry the fight to them. We will defend every farm, every road, every stone of the Vale, until they choke on the ashes of their own ambition." A roar of defiance erupted from the crowd. Morale had been waning since the first clash, but now the people were united. They sharpened their weapons, prepared their traps, and swore oaths under the torchlight. The Vale would not fall quietly. Underscore 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 underscore. Far away, in the black heart of the enemy camp, Kael Dravok listened to the crackle of fire as a new figure entered the tent. The speaker was cloaked and hooded, his face hidden in shadow. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, cold, and deliberate. "The knight rallies his people," the speaker said. "He will not wait behind his walls. He plans to strike your supply lines and reclaim the southern farms." Kael's lips curved into a grim smile. "Good," he said, rising to his full height. "Then he comes to me on ground of my choosing." The speaker stepped closer, placing a scroll on the war table. "I have mapped every path through the Vale. Here," he said, pointing to a narrow gorge, "is where we will break him. We will let him believe he wins until the jaws close." Kael's lieutenants nodded grimly. The trap was already set. Dawn broke under a sky the color of steel. The air was sharp and biting, carrying the promise of winter's approach. Sir Alaric stood at the head of his gathered host, a patchwork force of knights, farmers, blacksmiths, and even hunters from the wild hills. Their armor was mismatched, their weapons dented and worn, but their eyes burned with a single purpose. The Vale had been struck, but it was not yet broken. They marched south, the sound of boots and hooves echoing across the open fields. Smoke still rose from the remains of burned farms, black scars on the land they were sworn to protect. Alaric forced himself to look at every ruin they passed, engraving each one into memory. Each smoldering barn, each trampled field was a reason to fight. At midday, the column reached the edge of the gorge. The ravine was deep and narrow, flanked by jagged stone and twisted roots, a perfect choke point. Alaric felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. The place was too quiet. Not even the birds sang. "Archers on the ridges," he ordered, his voice low but steady. "Shields up. Move slowly." Vera rode up beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the cliffs above. "It feels wrong," she murmured. "No sign of scouts, no sign of their camps. They wanted us to find this place." Alaric nodded grimly, "which means we use it against them." He ordered his engineers to prepare barricades and caltrips, lining the narrow pass with whatever defenses they could carry. If the Black Banner came, they would bleed for every step. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the first distant sound reached them, a low, rhythmic thudding that made the ground tremble. The war drums of the Black Banner. Alaric gripped the hilt of his sword and turned to his men. "Hold the line," he said, his voice carrying across the gorge. "Tonight we stop running." Across the cliffs, the first black-armored soldiers appeared, their banners snapping like hungry wolves. The trap was not yet sprung, but everyone could feel it. The air was heavy with the promise of violence. And somewhere among the enemy ranks, Kael Dravok watched from horseback, silent and patient. The night had come exactly where he wanted him. Night fell heavy over the gorge, but no one slept. The air was thick with anticipation. Every crack of branch and rustle wind, making the sentries tighten their grip on their spears. Torches burned low along the barricades, their glow barely holding back the darkness. Then it came, a single horn blast, deep and resonant, echoing off the stone walls. Shadows moved on the cliffs. Arrows hissed from the darkness, cutting down 2 sentries before the alarm was raised. Alaric's command rang out over the din. "Shields up, archers loose." The gorge erupted into chaos. Black-armored warriors poured on the cliffs like a tide, their wolf banners silhouetted against the moonlight. The Vale's archers rained shafts on the attackers, felling dozens, but the enemy came on relentless, their shields locked, their boots pounding the earth. Alaric was everywhere at once, shouting orders, rallying broken lines, driving his sword into the first soldier to breach the barricade. Sparks flew as steel clashed in the narrow pass, every blow echoing like thunder. The gorge became a cauldron of noise, battle cries, screams, the crack of splintering wood. Vera darted to the melee like a wraith, cutting throats, whispering warnings, keeping the line from collapsing. But then the real danger appeared. The Iron Fong from the first skirmish strode through the carnage, his massive axe cleaving through men and shields alike. Alaric saw him, and felt the world narrow to a single point. The memory of their first encounter burned hot in his mind. The fear, the humiliation of retreat. This time he did not back down. "Hold the line," he roared, leaping from the barricade to meet the Iron Fang head-on. Their weapons clashed with sound like a bell being struck, the force of the blow rattling through Alaric's arms. The two circled one another in the narrow pass, the battle raging around them. For a moment, it seemed the veil might hold, but then another horn sounded, this one from behind. From the far side of the gorge, a second wave of Black Banner soldiers appeared, cutting off any hope of retreat. It was a trap. The jaws of the wolf had closed. Alaric's blood turned cold as he realized what Kael Dravok had done, and that survival would cost him more than they could afford to lose. The gorge had become a slaughterhouse. The second wave of Black Banner soldiers crashed into the Vale's rear like a hammer striking an anvil, throwing the defenders into chaos. Trapped between two forces, the men of the Vale fought like cornered beasts. Alaric's sword arm ached, his armor streaked with blood and mud. Around him, the barricades were splintered, bodies piled high. The Iron Fang pressed the attack, each swing of his axe forcing Alaric back a step. Fall back to the center. Alaric bellowed over the clash of steel. Circle the wounded. Hold the line. The defenders formed a tight ring, shields locking, archers firing over their heads into the press of enemies. For every soldier of the Vale that fell, two more of the Black Banner did as well. But it was not enough. The tide seemed endless. Vera appeared at his side, her dagger dripping black blood. "We can't hold much longer," she hissed. "If we stay here, we all die." "Then we carve a path out," Alaric said through gritted teeth. "Tell the riders to prepare." She nodded once and vanished back into the fray. Moments later, a horn blast rose above the din, the signal to charge. Alaric seized the moment. "With me," he shouted, rallying every man who could still stand. He drove forward like a spearhead, his sword flashing, his shield smashing aside enemies. The Vale's riders thundered down the narrow pass behind him, their lances breaking through the enemy ranks. The Iron Fang met him again, blocking his escape. Their blades clashed in a blur of sparks and fury. This time, Alaric feinted, sidestepped the axe's deadly arc, and drove his sword deep into the warrior's side. The Iron Fang staggered, roared, and fell. The enemy line faltered just long enough for the Vale's forces to break through. One by one, the defenders poured out of the gorge, dragging the wounded, leaving behind only the dead and dying. By the time they reached open ground, the survivors were few, their ranks shattered, but they were alive. Alaric stood at the edge of the field, breathing hard, his sword hanging at his side. The gorge behind them smoked with the fires of the dead. They had escaped the jaws of the wolf, but at a cost he could barely bring himself to count. The survivors limped back to the Vale under a sky streaked with crimson. It was not the glow of dawn, but the fires of the gorge still burning behind them. Their column was silent, broken only by the clatter of hooves and the groans of the wounded. When they reached the keep, the courtyard fell still. Families rushed to find loved ones, some collapsing in tears when they found only empty saddles. Blacksmiths, priests, and healers worked side by side to tend to the injured, the smell of blood mingling with smoke. Alaric stood apart, watching it all with a hollow expression. More than half his force had been lost. The gorge had been a victory for survival, not for honor. Vera approached him quietly, her hood pulled low over her face. "You saved who you could," she said. "It wasn't enough," Alaric replied, his voice low. "We walked into their trap. Every death tonight is on me." Vera's eyes glinted in the torchlight. "Then make it mean something. Make him bleed for every one of them." Alaric turned to the map table once more. He traced the roads of the Vale, his gauntlet fingers stopping on a small hamlet near the river. "We strike here next," he said. "It's the heart of their supply line. If we burn it before they can move their grain south, they'll feel it." Far away, in the heart of the enemy camp, Kael Dravok listened as his lieutenants reported the escape of the Vale's defenders. The firelight caught the scar across his face. making it look like a permanent sneer. They fought harder than expected, one lieutenant said. The Iron Fang is dead. Kael rose slowly to his feet, towering over them. Good, he said at last. Let them taste their small victory. It will give them hope, and hope makes the kill sweeter. The speaker stepped forward, unrolling a fresh map. They will strike back, he said. Their only choice is to go for our grain stores near the river. Kael's grim smile widened. Then we will let them come. And when they do, we close the trap again, tighter this time. He took the black banner from its stand and thrust it into the ground with a single motion. This war is not yet begun. By the time I am finished, the Vale will curse the day they chose to fight. The night was moonless, the stars veiled by drifting clouds as Alaric led a hand-picked company of riders toward the river. Their armor had been darkened with ash, their banners removed. Tonight was not a night for glory, but for vengeance. Vera rode beside him, her face hidden beneath a hood, her voice low. The enemy has fortified the grain stores, she warned. Expect guards and traps. Alaric nodded. Then we strike fast and leave nothing behind. They reached the riverbank just before dawn, the enemy camp still sleeping, its torches burning low. From the shadow of the trees, Alaric studied the layout. Rows of wagons laden with grain, guarded by only a handful of sentries. Beyond them, a watchtower stood against the pale horizon. Archers ready, Alaric whispered. The first volley of arrows dropped the sentries before they could raise an alarm. Then the riders surged forward, thundering into the camp with a roar. Steel clashed, men shouted, and the wagons were set ablaze one by one. Flames leapt high into the sky, casting the river in a hellish glow. Kael Dravok's soldiers scrambled to mount a defense, but the raid was too swift. By the time the camp was fully roused, half their grain was burning, and the other half floating away downstream. Alaric fought through the chaos like a man possessed, cutting down every foe that stood in his path. When the last wagon was aflame, he signaled the retreat. His riders withdrew in a flurry of hooves, vanishing back into the forest as the camp behind them burned. When they finally stopped to regroup miles away, the horizon still glowed red with fire. For the first time since the war began, Alaric allowed himself a grim smile. This will hurt him, he said. Now he knows we can strike back. But Vera's expression was dark. And now he will answer, she said. You wounded the wolf, Alaric. He won't run, he'll bite. The Vale erupted in cheers when Alaric returned. For the first time since the war began, the people smiled. Children ran to greet the riders, and blacksmiths rang their hammers like bells of victory. The sight of the enemy's grain wagons burning had ignited something in them. Hope, but hope was fragile. That night, as the keep celebrated, a lone rider appeared at the gates, his horse collapsing beneath him. He was pale, trembling, his armor soaked with blood. The village of Thorn Hollow, he gasped. It's gone. The celebration died instantly. Alaric rode through the night, a small detachment at his back. When they reached Thorn Hollow, they found nothing but smoldering ruins. The air reeked of death. The people had been slaughtered, not just killed, but butchered, their homes salted, their wells poisoned. In the center of the village square stood a single black banner, driven deep into the ground. At its base was a wooden pike, and impaled upon it was the head of the Iron Fang that Alaric had slain, its dead eyes staring accusingly at him. Pinned beneath the head was a message, scrawled in blood. Every fire you set, I will repay tenfold. Vera turned Alaric, her face pale. This isn't war anymore. This is vengeance. Alaric's knuckles whitened around the hilt of his sword. He ordered the banner torn down and burned, then swore an oath in front of his men. Kael Dravok wants blood? Then we give him war he will never forget. We will end this or die trying. Far to the north, Kael Dravok watched Thorn Hollow's ashes from horseback, the speaker standing silently beside him. They will come for you now, the speaker said. That is the idea, Kael replied, his voice low. I want him angry. I want him reckless. When he finally faces me, it will not be strategy that kills him. It will be his own fury. The black banner snapped in the wind, and the river of blood between them grew wider. Dawn broke over the vale in crimson light. As though the heavens themselves mourned Thorn Hollow, Alaric stood upon the battlements. staring at the smoke still rising in the distance. His heart was heavy, but his resolve had turned to iron. He summoned his captains and the surviving lords of the Vale to the great hall. The room was silent as he spoke, his voice hard but steady. We cannot wait for Kael Dravok to strike again. Every day we hesitate. More villages will burn, more families will die. The Black Banner must be torn down, not just from our lands, but from all the borderlands he has claimed. This is no longer defense. This is war. Some of the lords hesitated. Our numbers are too few, one protested. The enemy outnumbers us 5 to 1. Then we will find more, Alaric replied. The free riders of the northern steppes owe me a debt. The Stonehold clans despise Kael for raiding their mines. Even the river folk can be persuaded if we promise them safe trade routes. Vera stepped forward, her presence commanding. You all know Kael Dravok will not stop with the Vale. If Alaric falls, each of your keeps will burn next. Join us now, while we still have strength, or wait until his riders are at your gates. One by one, the lords nodded. Oaths were sworn, banners pledged, and within days messengers rode in every direction carrying Alaric's call to arms. The Vale's forges burned through the night, crafting spearheads and swords. Farmers became soldiers, and every hill fort sent its young men to fight. At the same time, Alaric sent Vera on a secret mission to the steppes. She would seek out the free riders, a fearsome cavalry that had once been his allies. You think they will answer? She asked before leaving. They must, Alaric said grimly. If they don't, this war ends before it begins. As she rode off into the wild, Alaric turned to his captains. Kael Dravok will expect us to hide. Instead, we will march to him and show him the Vale is not afraid. By the time the first snow of winter touched the earth, an army had gathered under Alaric's command. Not enough to crush Kael Dravok outright, but enough to meet him head-on. And far away, across the burning plains, Kael Dravok received word of this growing host. He smiled a predator smile. Good, he said. Let him gather everyone he loves in one place. It will save me the trouble of hunting them. The steppes stretched endlessly before Vera, a sea of tall grass rippling beneath a steel-gray sky. For 3 days she rode, guided by nothing but the wind and the distant smoke of nomad campfires. The free riders were a proud and dangerous people, quick to offer hospitality, but quicker still to kill if offended. On the 4th night, she found them. A crescent of tents stood around a blazing fire, guarded by riders whose eyes gleamed like wolves in the dark. As she approached, a dozen spears lowered toward her. I come under parley, she called, raising an empty hand. I seek your Khan. After a tense silence, one rider gestured for her to dismount. She was led into the camp, where the Khan awaited, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his face and a golden torque around his neck. His name was Timur, Alaric's shadow. Timur said with grin, recognizing her, I thought the Black Banner had finally cut you down. Not yet, Vera replied coolly. And if you join us, maybe never. Timur's grin faded. You are here for warriors. Again. Yes, Kael Dravok has burned Thornhollow. He will burn every village in the Vale if left unchecked. We need your riders to break his siege lines when he comes. Timur leaned back, studying her. And why should I risk my sons or Alaric's war? Last time we rode with him, half my kin never returned. Vera stepped closer, her voice low, because if Kael wins, he will not stop at the Vale. He will sweep across the steppes, take your herds, enslave your people, and hang your banner beneath his own. You know this is true. The fire crackled between them. For a long moment, Timur said nothing. Then a new voice spoke, a younger warrior at Timur's right hand. She is right, father. The youth said, better to fight now, while we have the strength, than wait for his iron riders to come to us. Timur's eyes narrowed. At last he rose. 300 riders, he said. That is what I will give. No more. It will be enough, Vera said. But as the camp celebrated the decision, Vera caught sight of a lone rider slipping away into the darkness, a scout bearing Kael Dravok's colors. She cursed under her breath. So he knows, she murmured. Timur frowned. Then he will strike before we can join Alaric. Then we ride tonight, Vera said. No rest until we reach the Vale. By dawn, the free riders thunder across the plains behind her, their hooves shaking the earth. Kael Dravok's spies had seen too much, and every hour they delayed brought his vengeance closer to Alaric's gates. Vera's breath misted in the cold air as she pushed her horse harder. The steppe wind bit at her face, and the rumble of 300 riders followed her like distant thunder. The free riders moved as one, a wave of horseflesh and steel. But even their speed might not be enough. Kael Dravok had learned of their alliance, and he would not sit idle. By the second night, Vera's fears were confirmed. As the moon climbed high, one of Timir's outriders returned, pale and grim. Enemy riders ahead. He reported hundreds of them. They wait near the river crossing. Timir cursed. He means to cut us off before we can reach Alaric. Vera studied the map in the firelight. The river crossing was the only fast way back to the Vale. If they tried to go around, they would lose 2 days. Time Alaric might not have. We fight, she said at last. Timir grinned fiercely. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. At dawn, the free riders formed a wedge on the frost-hardened plain, their horses snorting and stamping. Across the field, Kael's riders appeared like shadows, their black banners snapping in the wind. At their head rode a figure in dark armor. Not Kael himself, but one of his lieutenants, the warlord known as a jackal. He raised a horn and blew a single note, shrill and mocking. Hold! Timir barked, keeping his riders steady. The jackal wanted them to charge early, to break formation. Vera's heart pounded. This was no skirmish. This was a trap designed to bleed them before the real war even began. Then the jackal lowered his horn and pointed his sword. The black banner riders surged forward, a black tide rolling toward them. Now! Vera cried. The free riders spurred their mounts, their wedge slamming into the enemy's flank with devastating force. The clash was a storm of hooves and steel, screams and shouts blending into a single roar. Vera fought like a woman possessed, her twin sabers flashing. She cut down a rider, ducked another's blade, and felt the hot spray of blood across her face. But for every enemy they felled, more came pouring across the plain. Timir bellowed an order, and the free rider began to circle, using their speed to harry and break the enemy formation. The jackal shouted for his men to hold, but the free riders moved like ghosts, striking and vanishing, leaving corpses in their wake. At last, the jackal himself rode to meet them. His armor was spattered with blood, his eyes burning with hatred. He swung his axe toward Vera, and she met him head-on. Their clash was thunder and sparks, each blow ringing across the battlefield. The outcome of the fight would decide not just the crossing, but whether the free riders ever reached Alaric at all. The world narrowed to steel and fire as Vera met the jackal's charge. His axe swung in a deadly arc, shattering the shaft of a nearby spear as Vera twisted aside and struck back. Her sabers flashed, one cutting across his pauldron, the other slicing a shallow line along his cheek. The jackal only grinned, his teeth bared. You fight well for a shadow, he snarled, swinging again. But the battle around them was far from still. The plain thundered with the hooves of hundreds of horses as the free riders and black banner cavalry clashed again and again. Timir's voice rang over the din, commanding his warriors to strike in waves, never giving the enemy time to reform. Arrows hissed through the dawn mist, cutting down riders from both sides. Horses screamed as they fell. The air was thick with dust, blood, and smoke from burning wagons set aflame to block enemy advances. Vera ducked another blow, her body aching from the strain. The jackal fought like a beast, each strike meant to kill. He forced her back toward the riverbank, where the mud made every step treacherous. "Fall, little wolf," he spat, driving her sword arm down. But Vera was faster. She feinted left, then drove her knee into his chest, forcing him off balance. Her saber flashed, slicing deep into the joint of his armor. The jackal roared in pain and swung wildly, but Vera was already inside his guard. She drove her blade up beneath his breastplate. The jackal froze, his axe falling from his hand. For a heartbeat, the battlefield went silent in her ears. Then he toppled backward into the mud. At that same moment, Timir's riders broke the enemy line. The free riders circled and struck from all sides, scattering the remaining Black Banner cavalry. Push them back. Timir bellowed. Drive them into the river. The enemy broke. Some tried to retreat across the ford, only to be cut down. Others threw down their weapons and fled into the steppe. When the last of Kael's riders had vanished, Vera stood over the jackal's corpse, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She raised his severed banner high, letting the wind carry its tattered black cloth. Timir rode up beside her, his horse steaming from the fight. "You've just cut the head from Kael's wolf pack," he said with a grim smile. "But he will not take this lightly." Vera wiped her blade clean. "Good. Let him come. By the time he does, we'll be waiting with an army." The free riders wasted no time burying their dead and gathering spoils. Before the sun had reached its peak, they were already riding hard for the Vale, their victory won. But the war now closer than ever, and far to the south, Kael Dravok heard of the jackal's death. He did not rage. He did not shout. He simply stood, looking out across the plains, and said in a voice cold as iron, "Then I will go to them myself." Snow fell in the Vale, thin and wet, turning the roads to mud. Alaric stood in the great hall of the keep, a map spread before him, marked with stones and carved figures representing armies. The fire crackled behind him, casting long shadows over the room. Vera arrived just before dawn, exhausted but alive, the free riders at her back. Their arrival sent a ripple of relief through the Vale. For the first time, Alaric's forces outnumbered Kael's scouts. But Kael himself was still out there, and he was coming. Timir stepped forward, planting the jackal's torn banner on the table. "One of his wolves is dead, but the hunt isn't over." Alaric nodded grimly. "No, it has only begun." He called a war council that night. Lords, captains, and clan chiefs gathered in the hall, the air thick with tension. "We have 3 options," Alaric said, pointing to the map. "We can hold the Vale and force Kael to attack us in our walls. We can ride to meet him on the plain before he gathers his full strength. Or we can strike deep into his lands, burn his supply lines, and force him to retreat." The room erupted in argument. Some lords wanted to stay behind their walls and wait him out. Others, especially the younger captains, urged for an open field battle to prove their strength. Timir slammed his fist on the table. "Do not cower like frightened foxes. If you hide, Kael will starve you until spring. He is not a man to be outlasted." Vera's voice cut through the din. "We must choose carefully. Kael wants Alaric angry, reckless. He wants him to fight on ground of his choosing. We must strike, yes, but strike where it hurts him most." Alaric stared at the map, his jaw tight. "Then we march to the high plain." He decided at last, "The crossing fields will be our ground. If Kael wants a war, he will find it there." By morning, the Vale was alive with the sound of preparation. Banners were raised, armor polished. Forges worked without rest. Farmers left their plows to take up spears. The free riders patrolled the horizon, watching for the first sight of Kael's black banners. And then, one gray morning, a horn sounded from the watchtower. On the far ridge, black shapes appeared. Riders, hundreds of them, their banners snapping like wings of ravens. Kael Dravok had come. Alaric stood at the gate, his cloak snapping in the wind, and watched them gather on the horizon. "Sound the muster," he said quietly. "This is the day we have been waiting for." The campfires burned low as night settled over the crossing fields. The Vale's army stretched across the plain, a living sea of steel and leather, their breath rising in ghostly clouds. Alaric walked among his soldiers, cloak trailing in the mud. Men and women stood to attention as he passed, some nodding grimly, others whispering prayers under their breath. The air was heavy with the knowledge that dawn would bring slaughter. He found Vera sharpening her blades by the fire. Her armor was stripped down for speed, her sabers gleaming like moonlight. "You should rest," he said. She looked up at him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I could say the same to you." "Tomorrow we face Kael himself," Alaric said, staring toward the enemy campfires on the distant ridge. "I need you alive for that." "Then I will be," she said simply, and returned to her work. Elsewhere, Timir spoke with his riders. each one touching the earth before mounting their horses in a silent ritual. "We will ride like the wind tomorrow," he told them. "Strike fast, strike hard, and never let the Black Banner breathe." The lords of the Vale gathered in the command tent, some writing letters to their families, others staring silently into the fire. The youngest among them trembled as he tied his sword belt, knowing this might be his first and last battle. Above them, the sky was heavy with clouds. No moon shone that night, only the distant glow of Kael's campfires, hundreds of them burning like an unholy constellation. When Alaric returned to his tent, he found his banner laid out, freshly mended, the crest of the Vale gleaming. He stood for a long time staring at it before fastening it to his spear. Tomorrow, it would fly on the battlefield, or be trampled into the mud. At dawn, the horn sounded. The Vale's army assembled in silence, ranks upon ranks forming along the ridge. Across the field, Kael's host gathered, their black banners snapping like wings of carrion birds. Then, at last, Kael Dravok himself appeared, riding at the head of his army. His armor was black as a starless night, his helm crowned with a crest of raven feathers. Even from across the field, Alaric could feel his presence, cold, commanding, inevitable. The two armies faced one another, the air so still it seemed the earth itself held its breath. And then the first war horn sounded, long and low, rolling across the field like thunder. The battle had begun. The first horn faded, and for a heartbeat there was silence. Then the earth itself began to shake. Kael Dravok's vanguard surged forward, a wall of black-armored cavalry thundering across the plain. Their banners streamed behind them, their war cries rising like the roar of some vast, dark sea. "Archers!" Alaric bellowed. The Vale's bowmen loosed a single, perfect volley. The sky went black with arrows, and the front rank of Kael's riders fell screaming. But still they came, trampling their dead beneath them. Timur and the free riders spurred their horses, wheeling wide around the enemy flank. "Now!" Timur roared, and his cavalry struck like a spear, driving into the enemy's side and scattering their formation. The plain exploded into chaos. Spears splintered, shields shattered, men and horses screamed. The Vale's infantry locked shields and held the line as Kael's soldiers crashed against them, the sound like a drumbeat of war. Vera was everywhere at once, cutting down foes with twin arcs of silver, her voice rising above the din as she rallied the faltering. Alaric fought at the center, his blade gleaming, his banner held high. Around him, his household guard formed a ring, fighting back every charge that tried to break through. Across the field, Kael Dravok finally moved. He raised his black sword, and his personal guard advanced, cutting a swath through the melee. Wherever they passed, the Vale's line buckled under the weight of their assault. Alaric saw him then, the man who had burned Thornhollow, who had slaughtered his people and salted their fields. Kael's presence was like a shadow stretching over the battlefield, cold and unrelenting. "Sound the charge!" Alaric roared. The Vale's horn blared, and the infantry surged forward as one, meeting Kael's guard in a clash that shook the field. Steel rang on steel. Men fell screaming, the mud running red beneath their boots. Through the crush of battle, Alaric pushed toward Kael, cutting down all who stood in his way. Their armies clashed like titans, but both men knew the war would end not with 1,000 dead, but with one. When the two finally came face to face, the field seemed to fall silent. Kael raised his sword, its edge black as midnight. At last, he said, his voice like distant thunder, "Let us finish this." Alaric leveled his blade, his heart steady. "For Thornhollow," he said, and then they charged. Their blades met with sound like a bell tolling across the field. Sparks flew as steel struck steel, each blow heavy enough to break bone. Kael fought like a force of nature, each strike carrying the weight of a storm. Alaric met him blow for blow, his muscles screaming, his breath ragged. Around them, the battle raged, horns blaring, men shouting, the clash of war rising like a thunderous chorus. Kael pressed him hard, driving him back step by step. "You fight well," Kael growled between strikes. "But you are a man of walls, Alaric. You were never meant for this field." Alaric gritted his teeth and surged forward, slamming his shield into Kael's chest. "Then I will die on this field before I let you take it." Their swords clashed again. Kael's black blade caught Alaric's on the downswing, twisting aside, but Alaric let the momentum carry him forward, driving his shoulder into Kael and knocking him off balance. With a roar, Alaric struck. His sword cut deep, biting through black armor and finding flesh beneath. Kael staggered, dropping to one knee. But even then he swung again, his blade opening a deep gash across Alaric's side. Blood ran freely from both men. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath as they faced each other one last time. Kael raised his sword for a final strike, but Alaric was faster. With a desperate cry, he drove his blade straight through Kael's chest. The Black Banner Lord froze, his eyes wide, then sank to the ground. For a moment, there was silence. Then Kael's standard fell, trampled into the mud. Across the field, his army faltered, and then broke, fleeing into the mist. The Vale's soldiers raised a ragged cheer, but it was not a sound of triumph. Too many had fallen. The plain was littered with the dead, friend and foe alike. Alaric dropped to one knee, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. Vera was suddenly there, catching before he could fall. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded, though his eyes were distant, fixed on the horizon. "At what cost?" Timur rode up, his face grim. "We have broken the Black Banner, but Kael's death will not erase what has been lost." Alaric rose slowly, leaning on his sword. Around him, his people gathered, bloodied, weary, but alive. He raised his banner, its colors torn but still flying, and the army bowed their heads. "This is the price we paid," Alaric said, his voice carrying over the field. "Let no one forget it." As the sun broke through the clouds, its light fell across the crossing fields, gilding the battlefield in gold. The war was over, but the memory of its cost would linger for generations. And high above the plain, the last black banner fluttered in the wind. Then tore free from its pole, it was carried away, vanishing into the sky. Seasons passed. The crossing fields grew quiet again, the grass covering the scars of battle, as if the earth itself wished to forget. In the Vale, the keep's gates stood open, welcoming traders and travelers once more. The villages were rebuilt, one timber at a time, though the memory of the fires still lingered in the eyes of those who survived. Alaric walked the walls at dawn each morning, his limp a constant reminder of the wound Kael had left him. He no longer wore a sword at his hip, though one always rested within reach. His hair had gone silver at the temples. But when the people saw him, they bowed not out of duty, but respect. Vera became the keeper of the Vale's chronicles, writing down every detail of the war, so that no generation would forget what had been won and lost. Children gathered to hear her stories, their faces wide-eyed, some too young to imagine a time when their land was in flames. Timur did not stay. One winter morning, he rode away without fanfare, seeking other wars, other causes. But before he left, he clasped Alaric's forearm and said, "If the Black Banner rises again, send for me." And somewhere, far beyond the borders of the Vale, a black flag still hung in a forgotten hall, waiting. But for now, there was peace. How was my story today? Is your body feeling warm now? If you're interested in hearing more of my stories, come back to this spot while you rest after your long journey.